Hi, this is Dave from Priority Bicycles, and today we're going to install your new Priority front rack. Before we get started, it's important to know that we always recommend that your assemblies and installations be done by a professional bicycle mechanic. If you choose to assemble your front rack at home, we would recommend that a professional bicycle mechanic safety check your work before riding. Also, it's important to know that with any weight-bearing accessory like a front rack, that it can loosen over time. And if it becomes loose, it'd be really dangerous. So please be sure to check your front rack for tightness before each and every ride to ensure that you're safe. Now, let's get started. For today's build, we're going to need a 10mm open-end wrench, a 5mm Allen, and a 4mm Allen. If your bicycle comes with a front headlight, you'll also need a 2.5mm Allen. Now let's open the box. Inside your box, you should find a kit with several bolts, washers, and nuts. And then inside the bag, you should find the front rack, bracket, and a bolt. Once you've laid everything out, you should have 4 cap head bolts, 1 long, 1 medium, and 2 short, 1 flat head bolt, 2 nuts, and you have 6 washers. 4 have a large hole and 2 have a small hole. 2 concave washers, a black cap, and a bracket. Now, before we start installing on the bike, let's go ahead and remove the bolt from each adjustable leg. Each adjustable leg has several positions in it. For most of our bikes, we're going to go with the second position. So let's start there. Once you tighten, move to the other side and do the second hole position as well. Get it tight. Now, with the backstop of the rack facing you, grab this mount and the flathead bolt. Stick the flathead bolt through the rack. Make sure that the single hole is pointing out. Use 1 washer and 1 nut. And loosely tighten in a center position. You want to tighten the nut and bolt so that the threads are showing through the bolt. You'll use the 5mm Allen and the 10mm open-end wrench. You'll want this flat part facing forward with the backstop. For now, center it. We'll come back later and give it a final tighten. Now we're going to move to putting the rack on the bike. If you have a front light or front brake, we're going to need to take it off first. All right, if you have a front light, you'll remove it with the nut and bolt using your 5mm wrench and your 10mm wrench. If you have a front brake, the process will be very similar, other than you'll only use the 10mm wrench on the rear. Keep all the hardware that you're moving, as you'll need to use it later. If you have the front light, put it safely to the side. If your bike comes with bolts pre-installed on the fork legs, we're going to want to remove those now. If your bicycle has a plastic washer, you'll want to remove it now. Grab your rack, grab the longest bolt that comes with the rack, and thread it through. Now, if your bicycle comes with a front caliper brake, you can use the front caliper brake in place of this bolt. Throw one of the concave washers on and slide it through. It's important that you use the concave washer with the flat side pointing forward so that the bracket has maximum contact area. You can grab a second concave washer and put it on the fork. Then go ahead and get a washer and nut and tighten. Ensure the bolt is fully engaged past the locking threads on the nut. Then we're going to move on to the fork legs before we fully tighten down. Now, grab your 2 smaller bolts and your 2 smaller washers, thread them on, and one leg at a time, install the legs onto the fork. At this point, your basic rack assembly is done. You're going to want to make sure that it's level and then tighten every nut and bolt. When you tighten, especially with the locking nuts, it's important that you always use 2 wrenches at the same time. Go through, make sure the rack's level, everything is tight. Again, it's also important to make sure before every ride that your rack is tight. Now, if you have a front light, we're going to start by reversing the bottom bracket using a 2.5mm wrench. Once your bracket's flipped around and tight, you'll see the bracket's now in the right spot for your headlight to point forward. Of the bolts you have left, grab the longer bolt. You can start it with a washer. Get it through the right side of the rack. Then, if you have the concave washer from your fender, you can install it onto the rack and then put the bracket through. Finally, put another washer and the locking nut on. The threads of the bolt have fully engaged in the locking nut and tighten. Finally, there's a nice little rubber cap that you can put onto the extended threads of the bolt. If you have any questions, we're always here to help. Info@PriorityBicycles.com.